Hi, my name is Lori, and this is a Minnesota backyard. The COVID quarantine meant that a lot of us spent a lot more time at home. And I know for a lot of my friends and colleagues, that was really difficult. They found themselves getting stir crazy. But for myself, I found I didn't really suffer at all. And I think a big reason for that is because I had a backyard. I was able to get out into the yard every day. And every day I got to see the new things that were growing, the new animals that would visit the yard, and really to experience the small joys and simple wonders that every day brought. And so this year I wanted to record that and share those with everybody. When I first moved into my home about 20 years ago, my landscape was a typical suburban landscape with a turf lawn and some ornamentals planted around. Over the years, I've been adding to that landscape and rearranging that landscape as I learn new things, as my priorities change, and as I want to get more out of the land and be a better steward of this land. My priorities today are that I want every inch of my yard to be doing a job, either producing food, creating habitat for pollinators, insects and birds, rainwater mitigation, and places just to relax and enjoy. Helping me out in this effort is Courgette. She is my pet rabbit. She is an Oto, and her job is to eat vegetable scraps and produce the fertilizer that then goes into the compost pile and eventually ends up in my garden. It's April here in Minnesota, early April, and the weather has gotten really warm, unseasonably warm for this time of year. The downside of that is that we are still expecting the big April snowstorm that usually comes right around the middle of the month. So we'll see if we get it this year. One of the issues with early warm weather is that the fruit trees are pushing their leaves and flowers early, and if we get a killing frost, we could lose our harvest. That's why I refer to this as a dangerous spring. We're in this race between emerging nature and the weather. The other thing that spring means is that the yard is looking pretty rough right now. There's a lot of debris, a lot of stalks from previous plants, a lot of leaves still on the ground. Now the instinct is to get right in there and start cleaning it up, start raking things, clearing away the debris and whatnot. But there's only one job that you need to do at this time of year, and it's the hardest job of all. And that job is to do nothing. It's important not to disturb the leaf litter, not to rake up all of the debris that's on the ground, the stems that are in the garden, because the debris in those stems are the homes for the overwintering insects, pollinators, bees. For example, over 70% of Minnesota's native bees live in stems. They have their young, and those young overwinter in those stems. If we cleared those stems away, we would lose next year's hatch. The remaining 30% of Minnesota native bees live underground. If we remove the debris, we remove some of the protection that's helping them overwinter underground. So when is it safe to start the yard cleanup? Now what I do is I wait till I see the queen bumblebees flying around. Another rule of thumb you can follow is to wait until Mother's Day. Don't do anything until Mother's Day. The one exception I make to the do not disturb rule is cleaning up under the apple tree. And the reason is because the codling moth can live in the leaf litter under the tree. And we want to take away that habitat before those larvae hatch. So these leaves have been raked up from around the apple tree, and now they're going to go into the yard waste container. This is one batch that will not go into the compost heap. It's now the end of April, and it's a little colder today than it was a couple of weeks ago, but that's just Minnesota weather for you. So spring is not this gradual warming up from winter into summer. It's really more of a fight between winter and summer until summer finally wins. So we get those days that are really warm, and then we get those days that are much colder, and today is one of the days that feel a little frostier. We did get that snow in mid-April. This one was very light, so the blossoms on the trees are still in pretty good shape. So fingers crossed on that. We're not out of the woods yet. We have a few more frosts to look forward to. Today, however, I want to take a look at some of those first flowers and first fruits and first ephemerals that are starting to come out now. And what we're going to look at are food plants and the native plants. It's very important to realize that all of the native plants that are in my yard, they have been purchased from nurseries that specialize in native plants. And that's what you would want to do too if you did native plants. You would not want to go out into the woods and start digging up plants. That's very bad for the environment. The particular native plants we're going to look at especially are the ephemerals. This time of year, when the tree canopy is still not leafed out. So the sunlight can hit the floor of the forest in a way that it really cannot during the summer when the canopy is all leafed out. So ephemerals take advantage of that sunlight. They sprout very early, they sprout very quickly, and then kind of in the late spring, early summer, they start to die away. And so they give us some of our first blooms in spring, and they give us some of our first seasonal interest, and certainly some of the first food for any pollinators that might be up and about at this time of year. They are still not around. The bees are still sleeping. The butterflies still have not hatched. So we're very insect free right now at this time of year, but in a couple of weeks that will all change. All right, let's go ahead and take a look. Here we're looking at the Virginia bluebells. These are some of the very first to start sprouting up in the spring. And I just love these because day by day you can see them growing and emerging just almost before your very eyes. They have these beautiful blue flowers. And again, by the late spring, early summer, they'll start dying back and the other flowers here will be able to take over. This right here is one of my very favorites, although you'll hear me say that a lot. I have a lot of favorites. But this is the trillium. The trillium, which is on the point of bloom. So in a week or two, I'll come back here and take a picture of the actual blooming trillium. Trilliums, again, are another ephemeral that will bloom in the early spring and then die back over the summer. All right, this is not an ephemeral, but it's blooming now. So this is wild ginger that is just sprouting, and they start to flower very early at this time of year. Now this is not to be confused with the culinary ginger that you're used to cooking with. This is a Minnesota native ginger. And if you are interested and you have a shady area in your yard and you're sick of trying to get the grass to grow there because it's so shady, ginger makes a really wonderful ground cover. It thrives in the shade and it's really beautiful. Now the flowers of the wild ginger, you can kind of see it way down here. It blooms at the base of the stem, unlike most flowers which bloom on a stem kind of at the top of the stem. And the idea behind that then is that the guess is that their pollinator must be some kind of crawling insect like an ant or beetle or something. I'm not exactly sure what the pollinator of this is, but that's wild ginger in bloom. Here's another shot of that wild ginger in bloom, maybe a little bit of look at the flower that we see there. This little ephemeral I am especially happy to see. This is Dutchman's breeches, and for those of you who know what bleeding hearts look like, you can kind of think of this as the wild native version of bleeding heart. It gets these tiny little flowers that look like little pantaloons, and hence the name Dutchman's breeches. So again, if this comes into bloom, we'll take another picture at that time. Again, this dies back very early after the bloom. And so when I planted this, what you're planting looks just like a dead ball of dirt when you put it into the ground, and you just kind of cross your fingers. So like I say, I'm very happy to see this actually coming up. I'm gonna move on to food plants at this point, and this might be a surprising food plant. This is ostrich fern, but for those of you who have ever done foraging in the woods for fiddlehead ferns, this is what you're harvesting. Here you can see another picture of those fiddleheads, and you can kind of see how they get their name. They're tightly curled. They look like the head of a viola or violin. You harvest them by snapping off the heads, and then you can just lightly steam them or saute them. The taste is kind of like fresh green peas. It's a very green flavor. So very nice first fruit of spring. So here's another Minnesota native that people often go foraging for at this time of year, just like the ostrich fern, fiddlehead ferns. This is the ramp. So ramps kind of have this oniony flavor, and so they're harvested for that light oniony flavor. The thing about ramps, however, is that they're kind of slow growing, and when folks go foraging for them, they dig them up, and then now they've kind of taken away the population of ramps that are in that area. So if you do actually forage for these, you want to be careful not to be too greedy about it. These, of course, are just in my backyard, and I can be as choosy as I want to as far as when I harvest these. Another early green for those of you who like to grow your own food are these wintry savories and sorrels. So these early lettuces are perennials. They overwinter, and then they come up very early in the spring, and you can start harvesting your salad right away in the spring. These kinds of lettuces have often a very sharp kind of flavor, very lemony or very peppery. So they've got these strong flavors that make a really good accent in your salads. Another early producer, of course, is rhubarb. So the rhubarb is springing up, and it won't be long before we'll be harvesting that as well. This flower is not in my backyard, but I really love this flower, so I had to include it. This is bloodroot, and I saw this when I was walking in the woods. This is the time of year they're starting to come up again. It's one of my very favorites, so I just needed to include it. I've had no luck growing bloodroot in my backyard, so I just have to enjoy it in the wild. So thank you for joining me. I hope that you'll be able to join me again as the season progresses and we can see more wildlife and flowers in bloom and fruits in season. I hope that you can join me.